We received new details about the Elden Ring board game crowdfunding project that will be released later this year. Now, if you look at the all-in package last I checked, it is still cheaper than buying the game with the PS5. Now, whether that's a good enough deal for you, that I'll leave for you to decide. But for now, let's talk about what's been happening in the world of tabletop gaming for the week of November 17th, 2022. Last week, the workers of Noble Knight Games announced they would be forming a union, Noble Knight Games United, with the help of the Communication Workers of America. Noble Knight Games is a company that sells online, but their main store, warehouse, and headquarters is in Wisconsin, where they mostly focus on, I believe, out-of-print and older board games. Now, they have asked that they wish to be voluntarily recognized by the company so they can get straight into deliberations, where I'm sure there are plenty of different topics, but I believe some of the more upfront things are things like paid time off. Now, I actually did make a segment for this last week, but I cut it because during editing, I found a separate article that actually said they were not voluntarily recognized. So pretty much it made the whole section moot and very out of date. So we're talking about that here. So because it was not voluntarily recognized by Noble Knight Games, the union now has to go through the voting process that we've seen them talk about and discuss when, like, major news when it came to Amazon, Starbucks, Chipotle, I believe was another one, seeing how many of the workers approve of the union, which therefore forces them to recognize union and then go into those deliberation processes. This isn't the first time we've seen store workers, in particular at a tabletop style big online store, make a union. TCG Player had a union form a little while back. I believe they were not recognized, but they successfully got enough votes to become a union through that method. So it's very interesting to see these now. Both of these I think, have bigger online presences, and that's where we're going to see enough people say, no, it's time that we need to discuss this and form the union. I don't think this is something that's going to happen at your local card shop unless it's part of a chain. But what I think is also interesting was the people supporting them, the Communication Workers of America. They seem to, I've noticed the name pop up 2 more times and some other more nerdier, so to speak, unions, with the Paizo one as well as Raven Software with Activision Blizzard. And I'm really curious if a lot of these larger unions are starting to look more where nerd culture is growing. A lot of the ways nerd culture has hit mainstream, for example, the Marvel movies, I imagine those places already had a strong foothold from unions, or at least already recognized, because it was more of nerd culture using the medium that was already used, versus something like these stores, which selling a lot of board games or single cards was maybe not something really thought of before, but now they're getting big enough where you have enough workers to, well, unionize. And I'm really curious if we're not only going to see more unions in the world of tabletop gaming, if we're also going to see the Communication Workers of America in particular being one of the ones who support a lot more of these groups, and maybe even have just a whole section just for comic books, games, and video games. I'm going to be honest with you, this whole week is mostly dark stories from companies. And this one comes from Pandasaurus Games, a company that actually done a lot of games I love. Apparently, some workers have come up anonymously talking about how there are some really toxic working conditions in the company. The main complaint I'm seeing is that the payment is it's never on time. In fact, the 2 bosses in general, a married couple, Molly Wardlaw as well as Nathan McNair, seem to be in control of, for example, the finances and a lot of other issues. But at the same time, they're not always there. So even if, let's say, a project needs approval, the workers would say, hey, we need approval. They wouldn't get it. And then when they pass the deadline, they get in trouble for not getting the approval to move the project along to meet the deadline. And as payments is a big one, because they constantly not get their payments on time. And usually in a situation like this, maybe if you are the people higher up, you might hire someone to become the bookkeeper, the accountant, to help make sure these stay on time. But it seems that the bosses aren't really willing to give up that kind of power or let people see things. And that has caused a lot of issues. It's a sort of balance of, I think they have a lot on their plate, but they refuse to share it because that would be giving it up in some way. This is still smaller companies compared to like when we talk about things like Activision or some other huge video game company, but it's still going to be an issue. And I'm sure with, like I mentioned earlier in the first story, that unless there's this really small company that, or really smaller than I expected, maybe they're going to be talking about this unionization project as well. Who knows what's going down with all this? You'd think the people who made a game all about running a park successfully, I guess actually dinosaurs still escape regardless of what you do. So maybe that's the issue. They just assume bad things are going to happen. But unfortunately, you keep doing that, you're going to push out a lot of your workers. So I do expect we're going to be talking about Pandasaurus again soon, and I wouldn't be surprised if it also involves unions. Now we're going to move on to Hasbro, one of my favorite companies because they've made so many things that I love: Transformers, Magic the Gathering. And I have told you stories before about their $1,000 product, about some issues I've had with the cards, but I thought that was one of those things where it's like I complain about it because I'm a fan and there are things I would wish the company would work, but in terms of a business system, it is very profitable. Well, that might not technically be the case, it turns out. Bank of America, a big financial institution, they will sometimes rate companies if it's a good investment or not. Hasbro used to be one of those good investments. However, recently they actually downgraded Hasbro stock from buy to underperform. And the reason that is because they've been overprinting Magic cards in a way that is actually ruining the system for the long term of the game. It's shocking that it turns out someone at Bank of America actually watched, probably the videos of regular Magic card players and seeing like they're disappointed about what's going on. And Bank of America is sort of seeing this, in essence, Hasbro trying to push too hard in Magic, and I believe the quotes, I don't know if it's actually Bank of America saying this or just other people, ruining their golden goose. That's definitely true, as Wizards of the Coast has exceeded their expectations multiple times over the last few years. I think they wanted to double in 5 and they did it in like 2 or 3, their value. So the idea that they're constantly just trying to squeeze a little bit more out of something that's already doing very well finally seems to have caused some blowback. But the thing is, all this is just very interesting when combined with a couple other things happening at Hasbro. First off, let's look at Heroescape. It's an old game. They tried to bring it back through their special Hasbro Lab, their own crowdfunding service. It didn't work. And they announced they're going to shelve it indefinitely, meaning they're not going to give it any more support or try again. At least as of now, they can always change their mind. This is interesting, and I go to the next thing. Their video service, not their video service, their studios, E1 Entertainment, I believe it's called, is trimming down on anything that isn't part of their core franchises, your Transformers, G.I. Joe, etc. Then you throw in the fact that they sold, or not sold, but now Renegade Game Studios is publishing a lot of their other games, not including the ones they already had for license-wise, but the ones that usually fell under Hasbro. It really seems that they are giving up anything that isn't part of their core, like the Transformers, G.I. Joe, My Little Pony, and I'm blanking on one completely, which is really bad of me, but that core Hasbro toy line from the 80s or so, combined with the Wizards of the Coast, Dungeons & Dragons, and Magic the Gathering. And the problem here is, I feel, as Heroescape they assumed would go, I know it's not their only failed project, but I think it's the first one board game related on there. They haven't done too many of those HasLabs. They really are focusing on nostalgia. Magic does well, let's be honest, because there are people already invested. I still buy Magic product because it's a money pit. I mean, it's a great game, but you have to admit, any TCG, any living card game, you are so much more likely to continue the longer you've been in there because you have an investment. Not even like a resale investment, just I have a collection, I have fun cards, let's keep playing. Now, that has caused a lot of people from Magic to go to Commander, where you can use most of your cards, and the standard pool has dried up significantly, and that's a whole other video. But it just seems that they're doing a lot of decisions to constantly just catch your eye really quickly, but there will come a point, and I think hopefully this Bank of America announcement will be that sort of acknowledgement to them that they can't just rely on nostalgia and the desire to stay in the game to be the thing to keep them afloat. Like, don't get me wrong, I still love these things, but there comes a time when you just can feel that there's too much. And if you focus just on those, that's what's going to happen. If you don't give people a bit of a break, like a release of seasons to mess around with cards, it just becomes exhausting. And the same thing goes for the other things, even not game related. Let's say that there was a constantly new Gloomhaven, Frosthaven, Foresthaven released every 6 months. I don't think people would like that. They want time to actually sit and play the game. And there's this fear that they have to constantly keep pushing things out. It is nice to see these large financial institutions, whatever you think of them, to acknowledge that what the fans have been saying is that they are just trying to squeeze as much money out of these people in a way that is already a money-making machine. They're printing cardboard. They could focus more on trying to support the other formats to get people excited rather than making them feel guilty for not buying an $1,000 product, which could turn out to be worthless and is not technically real cards. I'm curious to see whether this actually makes Hasbro change course. I'm more pessimistic it won't, but I do think while Bank of America mostly focused or mentioned Magic the Gathering being ruined, and I do think that's Wizards of the Coast is a very, very good segment of Hasbro. I know this is a problem reflected in all of their franchises and IPs, and something that should be maybe reflected on a little bit more in giving some of these things, at very least, if not a break, a bit more focus and love, rewarding to all the fans who have been watching these things or playing these games when they first came out before the year started with a 2. And finally, a bit more of an upbeat story, but still in the world of trading card games. Flesh and Blood had its World Championship in San Jose, California, and it has ended, and so congratulations to Michael Hamilton for gaining the crown for Flesh and Blood, as well as taking home a prize of $100,000. I'm sure it feels pretty good to be crowned the champion for 2022, but that prize money I'm sure helps out a little bit. If you're interested in Flesh and Blood, definitely see if your local game store is selling / having days of playing it. Partially because they just released a new tournament gift pack, which will include some promos you can get, the shitty Christmas present, which I think is an absolutely adorable and clever idea for a way to get people to come to their local game stores during the holidays. Now, I did mention the Elden Ring project at the start of the news video. It is not out as of this recording just yet, but I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but there are still plenty of other crowdfunding projects that you may be interested in. The first one I want to talk about is The Thinning Veil. This is a miniatures game, and it was actually suggested to me by Scott Jacobson in our last video. So I thought I'd take a look at it, and it looks pretty cool. It's a big, heavy miniatures game where you are dungeon crawling, but it is heavily inspired by horror and Celtic myths. I find the miniatures really appealing, especially the monsters or enemies. In particular, I know the one that caught my eye was the Geistbound Barghest. This is partially because it reminds me a bit of the bear from Annihilation. That's not to say the other minis don't also look fantastic. It looks very interesting, and I think in particular, if you are looking for another dungeon crawler with some really nice minis, especially if you can paint them well, you really should at least check this one out. It looks like it has a lot of cool things to offer. As with almost any of these crowdfunding projects, especially the big miniature ones, there is a core pledge level that is for around $143, gets you the core game, but you can always go to higher pledge levels, which will give you more goodies, more minis, for whatever you feel like you need from this game. The next one I want to talk about is Creature Comforts Maple Valley. This is a game in the Creature Comforts world, but it is not an expansion, it's own standalone. In this one, you are preparing for the Spring Festival. You will go around a map gathering resources in order to build different items for the festival, such as lanterns, music, as well as, of course, making some friends along the way and maybe even getting some badges. I actually got the chance to preview this back at Gen Con, and even in its rough prototype state, I found this to be very adorable, very cute, and had a pretty good gameplay loop. It has a very simple and clever style, and seeing how the game will look in its final version with these beautiful wooden pieces is definitely one that has not only now mechanically caught my eye, but also visually. If you're looking for a family-friendly game, I highly recommend you check out this one. And if you like the look of this and the style, maybe check out their previous game, Creature Comforts. If you're just looking for this one, you can get this game for $55, but they have a higher pledge level for both this one and Creature Comforts, both of them in their Kickstarter version. So, extra little goodies, promos, and everything to really make your game as pretty as possible. Finally, we have an RPG titled Convictor Drive. This is inspired by the Kamen Rider, but you're also your Ultramans, your Super Sentai, people in mechanized sort of suits kind of deal in a special city where there's all this advanced technology, be it crime-ridden, so you've been tasked with stopping it. Though apparently trauma is going to actually be a big theme in this in terms of powering up your suit and just trying to fight through it, which I found to be very funny because the music was, I guess this is actually part of the Courseval anime, very upbeat. This is a general genre I've always enjoyed since I've been a kid. I'm sure that's not a shocker for anyone who's seen the toys behind me on set, but this looks really well put together, very well done. If you're the kind of person who likes this kind of genre of media and wants to either run the city for your cyborgish cops or even be one of the players ready to suit up, take a look at this Kickstarter. You can get a PDF version for $20 or a hardcover for $40. But that's everything we have today. Let me know your thoughts on the stories. Do you think Hasbro is sinking their own ship, or will they be able to coast along as they see fit? Bank of America is just a bit too worried. Let me know on any of the other stories, any projects, and just like with the Thinning Veil, let me know if there's a project I should have mentioned on the show, preferably one that isn't ending very soon. I'd love to talk about it. It's always great to hear what projects you guys think look good. But for now, thank you so much for watching. If you can do the usual to like, share, subscribe, and especially if you think someone would be interested in the video, share it with them. And of course, thank you for everyone who supports me on Patreon, all my rollers. You are some of the best dice out there, and you are always giving me those crit rolls. But for now, I'm Will, and this has been the Board Game News from Roll for Crit.